So now we're going to move on to what is a Lophotrochozoan. Lophotrochozoans are a monophyletic group, so that means that they are the descendants of a common ancestor. There's 13 phyla, and these include things like rotifers, flatworms, annelids, and mollusks. And there's two morphological traits that occur in some of the members of Lophotrochozoa. So they can either have a lophophore, which is only found in three phyla, or a trochophore larva, which is found in many phyla. Okay. The lophophore is a feeding structure that they some of the lineages have. Okay, so the lophophore is specialized for feeding. It has rings that surround the mouth of the animals, and it mainly functions in suspension feeding. The trochophores are a type of larva, and the larvae have a ring of cilia around the middle, and this functions in swimming, okay, mainly. It can also function in feeding. So here you can see the lophophores, and you can see the ring of, or you can see the tentacles that are surrounding the the mouth. Okay, and these tentacles also have cilia on their surface. Okay, so they're used mainly for suspension feeding. Then over here you can see a lophophore larva with the cilia around the middle. So the cilia again is the main function is for swimming. So it allows for the larva to disperse to different locations, different habitats. Okay, but it can also be used for feeding. So the trochophore larva occurs in animals that undergo indirect development. So these are animals that have a larval form, because when animals have a direct development, that means that once the animal, emerges from like an egg or some other process, it looks like a mini version of the adult. So it doesn't have to undergo any kind of transformation. When an animal has indirect development, what you get out of the egg is a larval form that looks completely different than the adult. And it has to undergo metamorphosis to make the changes, and then it'll look like the adult. Okay. So the trochophore larvae originated early in the evolution of Lophotrochozoans, and then it later evolved in different larval types in some of the groups. But one thing that you should know is that the larvae is not unique to Lophotrochozoans, because other groups like sponges also have larvae. Right? Or if you remember from the Cnidaria lab, in the moon jelly life cycle or the Aurelia life cycle, it also starts off as a larval form, so a planula larva that then develops into like the cyphostoma, which is the polyp form. Another thing you're going to see in Lophotrochozoans is the spiral cleavage. So spiral cleavage is a synapomorphy for the Lophotrochozoans, which is the monophyletic group. When the cells divide at oblique angles, the spiraling pattern of the cells results in the blastula, right? And the spiral cleavage has been highly conserved in some of the Lophotrochozoan phyla, but it has also been lost in some others. So here you can see the two types of cleavage next to each other. So when you have a spiral cleavage, the top cells are kind of offset compared to the bottom ones. whereas in radial cleavage, the top cells are right above the bottom cells. Animals that belong to Lophotrochozoa can have any of the following. They can have a lophophore or a trochophore larva or the spiral cleavage. Okay, but one thing you're not going to see is all the Lophotrochozoans possess all three of these characteristics. Lophotrochozoa include species that have long, thin tube-like bodies that lack limbs. So these are essentially, a lot of these are going to be worms with a tube within the tube body design, where the outer tube, which is made up of the skin, which is derived from the ectoderm, right? Then you have an inner tube, which is the gut, that's derived from the endoderm, and then you would have the the muscles and other organs that are derived from the mesoderm in between the two. So other organs like blood vessels. One of the groups of Lophotrochozoans are flatworms. So these animals are, like the name says, they're very flat. Okay, this includes the phylum Platyhelminthes. Platy meaning flat, helminth meaning worm, so flat worms. So these animals lack a coelom, so that means that they're acoelomate. And they also lack structures that are specialized for gas exchange and circulation of oxygen and nutrients. So they don't have things like blood that will circulate the oxygen or nutrients. What they have instead is, or what they do is, they get their oxygen from diffusion. But in order to diffuse things like oxygen, it has to be moist. The skin has to be moist. So these animals they have to be in moist environments. Okay? And also, they have a high surface area to volume ratio because of their flat bodies. Okay, so that also aids them in the diffusion of nutrients and oxygen, but it can also cause them to lose a lot of water easily. So one of the hypotheses is that the flattened body is an adaptation for these worms because it does provide the large surface area for gas exchange since they lack the structures to take in the oxygen. And the flat body plant allows for those nutrients and gases to diffuse easily to the cells. So here on the right, or on the left, you can see a turbularian. Okay, these are free living. So these animals are out on their own. They're either scavenging for food or um, preying on other animals, usually smaller organisms. So you can see the eye spots here. You can see the gut in the middle, and then there's also branching to the gut, which is called the diverticula. So this helps the animal deliver nutrients to the rest of the body because they do have an incomplete digestive system. So they only have one opening, which would be the mouth. Okay, so they do consume food through the mouth. Okay, you can see the pharynx here, and then from the pharynx it goes into the gut, and then from the gut it'll be delivered to other parts of the body uh, with this diverticula, okay, with the branching here. So to get rid of the solid waste, it has to exit through the mouth also. And then on the right, you can see an example of a parasitic fluke. Okay. Um, so there's many different types of flukes. You have things like the sheep liver fluke. There's the human blood fluke. Um, so yeah, so different types of flukes. So flatworms is a large, diverse group that consists of four major lineages. You have the turbellarians, like the Dugesia. Okay. There's the, and these are also called planarians. There's the Cestoda, like that includes tapeworms, Trematoda, which are the flukes, and then Monogenea, okay, which are other parasitic worms. So these are really tiny. These are usually found in places like the gills of fishes. So Turbellaria, these are uh, a paraphyletic group that consists of free-living flatworms. Most of them are freshwater or marine, and they can prey on things like protists or uh, like bacteria, and also they can scavenge for they can scavenge on dead animals. Okay, they do have that blind digestive tract. Okay, so the opening is for ingesting food and also eliminating waste. Then we have Cestoda, which are endoparasitic worms. So these parasitize vertebrates and they absorb nutrients by diffusion across their body wall. So because they're absorbing their nutrients, these animals do not have a mouth or gut, okay? Because the host is doing all the digesting and they're just absorbing the nutrients from the host. Usually humans get infected with tapeworm when they're eating, or when they eat undercooked meat, like pork or beef or fish. For trematodes, these are also endoparasitic. Some of them can be ectoparasitic, and these parasitize on vertebrates, arthropods, annelids, and mollusks. So, for example, flukes, there's the fluke that's responsible for schistosomiasis. So this is a human blood fluke, and it's considered to be a serious public health issue in tropical and subtropical nations because they have infected more than 200 million people worldwide. And what they do is they feed by gulping on tissues and fluids, often causing blood in the host's urine or stool, and also kidney failure, along with other problems. Okay, so we'll stop here at flatworms and we'll continue with segmented worms on the next video.